Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
I have this notion of loophole decisions that I think a lot of times when we decide to do something, make a good resolution, there's what I call a loophole in it. In other words, when you make it, you almost feel as though you won't keep it. You almost have a sense that, well, if the slightest thing comes up here, I'm going to break it. So I say I'm not going to eat at night, but if I have a cold, well, I know I'll eat. Or if I had a bad day, I'll probably eat. Or if I have a headache or something, I'll have a snack before I go to bed. It's like there's a loophole built into the quality of the decision. And I think there's other decisions that have a greater firmness about them.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Bruce Kramer, a lawyer practicing in the city of Toledo. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of New Year's resolutions. Here is Father Bacik.
Bruce, I want to thank you for being here and speaking with me about serious matters. You and I have been friends for a while, since back in high school days, and we have an interesting custom we've often done, and that is gather at the New Year's Eve and at your home and have a party, and we've sort of turned it into a ritualized kind of occasion when we look at our previous resolutions and make resolutions for the future. And I wonder if we might not use that as a stepping off point for talking a bit about the significance of New Year's and resolution making and what that's all about.
One of the nice parts about that evening, Jim, is we reflect on our achievements for the past year. And I think that's something that oftentimes is overlooked when people are thinking in terms of New Year's resolutions. I think that New Year's ought to be used to kind of reflect on the past year, as we do over dinner, and take a look at how well we did or how poorly we did on certain areas of resolve for the past year, and take some heart in the fact that we did in fact make some progress in a couple of areas.
I like that positive emphasis. I think that is one thing that happens in our group. It's a familiar group gathering each year, and what we really do is to sit around the table and take turns telling other people how we have done on our previous New Year's resolutions, which many people have remembered, and then to
make our chagrin on it.
Yes, right. Why didn't you do what you said you were going to do? And then to try to work from there and say what we are going to try to do in the coming year. And I find, as you suggested, that there's a lot of support in that. It's good to be with people who are in the same struggle or who are not judgmental about our failures, and especially people who are supportive and are willing to applaud our efforts. I notice sometimes as we go around the room and someone says that they really have done well on their resolution or have tried to make progress on it, that there's a general supportive feeling in that others are saying, oh, no, good work, or I noticed that, or we're with you in that struggle.
And that's another part of the New Year's resolution that, or the notion of making New Year's resolutions that oftentimes is overlooked, and that is the sharing aspect. It seems to me that New Year's resolutions, it's not so much a matter of whether we keep them or not, or whether we succeed in what we strive to do. Rather, it's the reflection. It is the commitment to do better or differently, and then sharing that with someone else. And at that point, obviously, it's like when one chooses to quit smoking, as I do so often, or go on diets, which I do so often. And it's not so much whether I succeed or fail. At least I'm now to that point of rationalization. Mm-hmm. Rather, it's that I share that with someone. And then, as you suggest, out of that comes the support group. Out of that comes the notion of commitment. And, of course, there's an underlying sense of embarrassment if you don't do what you said you were going to do.
Yeah, I've often found that to be a great motivating factor to tell somebody else. So if I decide I'm not going to eat at night before I go to bed, a common ploy for me will be to tell some people that. that I intend to do that. And I find that to be great motivation. Like, well, that gives it a firmness. You know, I'm not kidding around now. Other people know about this. I've said it out loud, and perhaps now it becomes harder to break that. Or just the fact that other people know about it may well ask how you're coming with your diet, or how you're coming with your good intentions to pray more each day, or something like that. So I find it to be a positive motivation. And there's something in it. I have this notion of loophole decisions that I think a lot of times when we decide to do something, make a good resolution, there's what I call a loophole in it. In other words, when you make it, you almost feel as though you won't keep it. You almost have a sense that, well, if the slightest thing comes up here, I'm going to break it. So I say I'm not going to eat at night, but if I have a cold, well, I know I'll eat. Or if I had a bad day, I'll probably eat. Or if I have a headache or something, I'll have a snack before I go to bed. It's like there's a loophole built into the quality of the decision. And I think there's other decisions that have a greater firmness about them, where we are convinced, no, I'm serious about this. Now, tiny things aren't going to get in my way. And I think maybe communicating some of that firmness of decision to others has a bearing on the whole thing as well.
Well, I think it strengthens up the commitment. And I think it's the underlying commitment that has to do with whether you've made a loophole decision, as you characterize it, or one wherein you have that underlying sense that, by golly, I'm going to do that. And I'm committed to doing that, and wherein I think we have a lot more success. And there's yet another aspect of that, and I guess it has more to do with the notion of reflection, or which in some circles is referred to as reconciliation, if you will, either by way of a sacramental sort of thing or otherwise. And I think it is well to go back and take a look at that past year and reconcile those loophole decisions that we made, and understand why we had that loophole in there, that fail-safe mechanism where we don't beat up on ourselves too much for not following through. And if we can go through that sort of reconciliation, that assessment, that reflection, and then turn forward, if you will, take a few moments in the rearview mirror to take a look at where we've been, and then shift our eyes to the windshield to take a look at where we're going, and do that with the knowledge that not unlike a captain on a ship as he leaves the harbor, if he has no destination in mind, if he has no course charted, there is a precious little chance of him getting to where he'd like to go. And if we don't have some sense for what we'd like to have happen to us, or what we would like to make happen, or what we would like to be at cause about during 1983, there's a good chance we won't realize anything.
Won't do anything constructive or positive. I think your idea about checking the rear view mirror first is a good one. Maybe we ought to spend a little more time on that. You used the term reconciliation, which is interesting. I think part of that reconciliation occurs within ourselves, doesn't it? To be reconciled with the failures of the past, and to be able to balance that with the good things. I think a full assessment of the past ought to be able to see both things. I think there's a human tendency to see only the negative. You go to bed at night and you think over the day, very many people will find out all they think about is the few mistakes they made, or the ways they've blown situations, and all the good things, the positive efforts made, seem to slip by in many ways. And so I think part of that reconciliation that you're talking about would include getting a large picture of what's going on. And I suppose many people find out that maybe there's good things they did that they didn't even recognize. And maybe that's something that people can point out. I think that happens in our group as we go through this sometimes. Someone will give maybe a sort of pessimistic report on what has been going on with them, and then maybe their spouse or a friend will say, yeah, but you did this well, or you did something else right here. And maybe that other people, again, help us to get a fuller picture of all that.
You know, that triggers for me the thought that we should spend some time thinking about things that our friends and our spouses and our children and our parents have done well, and take a moment to tell them that you've noticed that. I think that oftentimes, in a lot of those situations, we see support characterized by way of criticism, and saying, and especially, of course, in the parent-child relationship, or the penitent, the confessor-penitent relationship, or the doctor-patient, or the lawyer-client, or whatever. And people are always focusing on what went wrong and what the penalties are and what the ramifications are and why don't you shape up and why'd you do that and all that sort of thing. And why not take some time to reflect upon what our friends did well, so that, especially as one looks forward to an event like you and I participate in each year, where we can say to our friends, gee whiz, I noticed that, and be able to support them.
And that good thing that is there. Yeah, I think that's probably a good practice on a daily basis. I notice in doing marriage counseling, very often I will be suggesting to each of the spouses that they do something different, try to improve in one way or another, and it seems vitally important at that stage, if they end up doing it, that their spouse will say, hey, that was fine, I like that, or that was good. So if the husband's supposed to be trying to be more attentive and talk more when he comes home instead of watching TV right away, it's his part of this improved relationship. Well, when he does it, it seems important for the wife to say, I enjoyed the conversation, or that was nice, or it was good to share that moment with you, or find out what you're thinking or feeling. And that positive reinforcement obviously then helps to sustain that good kind of activity. And as you suggested, I think there's all kinds of relationships that could be applied to. And the parent-child one, surely. So often I talk to collegians who feel that throughout their growth years they didn't really receive that from their parents. They feel something greatly lacking, that all they ever heard was the sermon or the prohibitions or don't do this and that. And that positive word would help so much. So I think parents are well advised to maybe think about that side of things as well, especially maybe when dealing with adolescents, when it's so crucial that they form a good self-image and feel good about themselves. And maybe the parents, when they are able to say that, when they do something well, they act responsibly, use their freedom well, help around the house or whatever it is.
I see a thread of rationale there, in that as one thinks about reconciliation and taking a look at how things have gone in the past for one's own self, and your comment that we tend to focus on the negative, and I think that comes from just about all of our each of us being trained to be humble, so that our humility suggests to us that we focus on those things. And then your other comment about the fact that doing something a little bit different, which kind of brings to mind a comment that I heard recently about the difference between a groove and a rut. And once in the groove, thank you, it becomes very easy to stay right there, and it becomes a rut. And as we look at 1983, and as we take a look at making some New Year's resolutions, we may want to take a look at those things, those grooves that we're in that may have become ruts, which ought to be looked at by way of trying to make a change, trying to introduce some excitement. And I think in looking at 83, in looking at resolutions, as well as taking a look in the rearview mirror, as I had commented about, we can be as modest in those expectations or as grand in those expectations as we choose to be. I have, over the last couple of days, given some thought to, well, what would make 1983 absolutely perfect? And that sort of led me to, well, what has been my best year, and why was it my best year? And, what is it that I'd have to do to make 83 absolutely perfect? Well, that's rather grand, thank you. And one need not approach it on that basis. One might simply say, well, here are a couple of grooves that have become ruts. And what do I do to get out of those?
You're great with imagery, Bruce. I
learned that from my good friend Jim Bacik, who does that so well.
Yeah, I like the images that you're using there. A couple things are triggered in my mind. I want to just go back a little bit to something you said earlier about the reconciliation and almost sacramentalizing it. Our little gathering, in my mind, has a sort of a ritual or liturgical character to it. It's almost like communal celebration of the sacrament of penance that we know in the Catholic community so well, where we are able to say out loud what has gone wrong with us and what we haven't done right, and to know a forgiving word, not said in that case by a priest necessarily, but said by our friends and our community. And it seems like that part of the value of what we do is sort of the ritualized activity to it. And it reminds me that indeed I think that there is a symbolic character to this whole New Year's thing. I think that it is in many ways a religious type occasion. Historically, it's been that. We know that almost all cultures have celebrated the New Year in a couple of different ways. One, by checking out the previous year and trying to get reconciliation with all that, trying to get forgiveness. You know, there's one custom that they call the scapegoat, where we get that phrase scapegoat, and that is they actually took a goat and would put on that goat their sins and their failings and the things they didn't think were right, and then send that goat outside the village. The goat going out then would be the sign of getting rid of those sins and failings which they have recorded there and sent out with the goat. And I think that that represents what we find in a lot of cultures. There's these ablutions, the water washings with water, the sense of let's get this past straightened out here, and let's do it symbolically. Let's have a way of showing that definitively I have dealt with that. I've gotten a hold of it. I've taken care of the sins. I've gotten rid of my guilt so that I'm now together and healthy and ready to take on the future and begin looking forward. So this really has a whole religious character. Again, I believe that in our culture there is sort of a religious sentiment at this time, often not named that way. We think of it more in terms of parties and excesses and so on, which is interesting as well. That's in the primitive cultures as well in their religious rites. Very often there were orgies connected with it and wild excesses and sort of a return to chaos in a sense. They would change places, for example, symbolically. Masters would become slaves, slaves masters, and so on. Just to upset the order of things, to get out of the rut, as you put it, and to get back to sort of a sense of chaos in a way, that things are all shaken up now. Our ordinary perceptions of things are gone. And they did that, of course, in order to be able to look forward, to celebrate the new creation in a way. So they had a lot of excesses, the lack of disciplines at that time, much as we have, I suppose, in our own culture today with our party scene and so on. And they saw it as a way of preparing for looking forward, preparing for what they saw as the repetition of creation, redoing creation, getting things ordered again and getting them maybe out of the rut and into a constructive groove, to use your imagery. So I often think of what we do as having a liturgical, sacramental side. I don't think many people treat New Year's in that way, really. Not many people of my other friends do. But I believe underneath it all, for many people, there is a religious sense, like I ought to get straightened out here, get reconciled with what went on, and maybe there's ways in which I ought to shape up. And of course we enshrine that in our custom of making New Year's resolutions, which many people laugh at and say that's ridiculous, or why make them, because they don't do any good. But I think you've pointed out that they have a value in themselves, just in the value it has in forcing us to reflect and check out and to look at our ideals, and grandiose as they may be, or as mundane and minor as they might be.
Not unlike taking an exam. The value isn't so much in taking the exam as it is in getting prepared for it. You know, I don't want to make our tradition sound to be something that's not rather easily done, and I think just a moment to talk about the fact that we started that as a party. Mm-hmm. And it was just a few of us getting together as friends, not wishing to go out and spend that much time on the highways or get into too loud and boisterous an environment. So we chose to just kind of gather at our home. I think we had dinner as part of it. I think we did that at midnight. So we kind of gathered during the evening, as early as 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and then spent some time together. Had a few drinks, dinner at midnight, and then I think over time we got to this point where we did this sharing of resolutions, our reflections on the past year, and also I think it's interesting that we're not the same folks are there each year, and that there's not that need for stability in the group, and that we have been very open to accepting others into the group, and they have been very good about participating, some to a greater and some to a lesser degree, so that if someone would be inclined to try to crank something like this up, it isn't that difficult to do, and you don't have to carefully choose the participants, and you don't have to agonize over the arrangements. You just kind of slide into it.
That's right. And you need a fundamental trust, I suppose, of the people who have gathered. Otherwise, you can't say, out loud how you have been doing and what you've been doing. I like your notion of the looking ahead, Bruce, and a chance to check out ideals and to make perhaps a situation where you'd say, well, how would I like the year to go? What kind of a person do I want to be at the end of it? Strikes me that in life generally, we need that kind of thing. We need some goals for ourselves. I mean, many people who feel as though they're in a rut maybe have lost some of the excitement of life because don't seem to be any new goals out there, any grand schemes that one would like to accomplish, or a different kind of person we would want to be. It seems to me part of a healthy religious outlook in life is to have expectancy of the new, the sense that it can be different, that I could change, and that I really ought to have some sense of where I want to go in that whole business.
One of the criteria that I think works well, certainly for me, and that might be reflected upon at this time of year, is how do I want to be remembered? How would this be perceived by whoever? And that includes, in my case, I use that yardstick. That is what I think other folks' yardstick might be in a lot of different occasions. And that's when I'm on the phone talking with someone. That can be in the quiet of a heavy conversation with a friend or a client. That can be for me when I'm working out and playing squash, and if I'd really blow something, and whereas I might be given to some kind of profanity or whatever, I think about what if someone was in the back of the court watching me, such as one of my children or one of my colleagues or whatever. And I think that might be a useful tool as one looks ahead at 83. And
that is, I think that can be. I often tell people that with families that maybe one could ask oneself, what would I want my children to say about me after I have died? Now, that's not the kind of thing I don't think that people are ready to face every day or something, but periodic examination, like New Year's time, seems to be a way of going about that. How would I like to be remembered? What do I want them to put on my tombstone or say at my funeral, or people with children saying, well, what would I want my son or daughter to say about me after I am dead? It really gives a perspective to things, doesn't it? Maybe you don't want your son to say, my dad made $30,000 a year or something. Maybe you want him to say, he was a good man who talked to me. And that might dictate your behavior throughout the year.
And if you don't like what they might say at this point, we always have the comfort of tomorrow being the first day of the rest of our life, and that 83 could be that shift in direction. Certainly, neither of us is going to be a new man come the first of any year, but we sure can start to head off in a different direction and start to move away from he who made X dollars a year for so many years, and isn't that wonderful, to a man who talked with me.
Yeah, always a chance for the new and to make progress. A lot of times people will ask me in counseling, well, do you really think my child can change, or my parents can change, or my spouse can change? I always find myself responding sort of optimistically, like, yeah, I think they can. And I do it mostly because I've seen people do it. I've seen people in very difficult situations actually make a difference in their life, turn it around, change, become a different kind of person. In Christian circles, we call that conversion, a turning around. Metanoia is the scriptural term, that we completely turn direction and move in a positive direction rather than a destructive one. And I see people do it, and therefore it makes me think it can be done.
And as you say, it oftentimes happens under stress. And what better time, economically certainly, than now to make some of those changes? A friend was reflecting just within the last few days about the fact that his life had been unalterably changed over the last couple of years by the economic environment, and went on to reflect that he was probably one of 100 million people in this country who find themselves in that situation. and that they're, and he and I talked about several specifics, not only friends, but also certain areas where you're going to see that sort of thing happening throughout the country, so that one can look upon this hopefully recovery that we are in, having come out of whatever we came out of, and say, this is a great opportunity for that change. This is a great opportunity. There's enough stress now to allow me to make the kind of changes that I'd like to make. I think we oftentimes need to be pushed into that situation. We need that outside impetus. And out of that comes the conversion, or the change in direction.
Certainly crisis is most helpful there to concentrate our attention and to get our energies flowing. And I guess we would like to think of the New Year's as a chance to do that, perhaps whether we're experiencing a terrific crisis in our life or not, but this whole idea of New Year's resolutions as sort of a punctuated bit of time, an important period here in the year when there is a sense of new beginnings. I think that many of us feel that, not so?
That's very true.
Yeah, at this time of the year. I think, Bruce, too, there's I would like to put this in a religious context, this looking forward and making the plans and seeing how we might do better. I think one thing we have to deal with is the possibility of failure in that, and I think from our Judeo-Christian viewpoint, what we end up saying is there's a God who understands that. There's a God who asks us to take just one step forward as we go along. He understands that the best of our plans and the deepest of our resolutions may go astray, and I think we have to feel comfortable with that, have a sense that, yeah, that's all right. If I can make the good resolution knowing that if I fail, there's a God who will pick me up and help me to begin again. And I think there's this whole idea of the new creation, the new thing in life, that we're not imprisoned in our past, and it's possible to get the slate wiped clean for us, and that really in our Judeo-Christian tradition we believe in a God who opens up a future to us and says, take a step forward, it can be brighter and better. I think that's the fundamental basis for our hope and optimism as we would enter this new year of 1983.